our next speaker for today. We are running quite a few minutes late indeed. Apologies about that. Is John Crum. John Crum is the Associate Director of the Integrated Media Systems Center in the Viterbi School of Engineering at the University of Southern California. And the talk today is called Personal Data Privacy.
Hello, my name is John Crum. Here we go. And I'm going to talk about personal data privacy leaks. I am different from the first two speakers. I am a computer scientist and I work at the University of Southern California. Just by way of introduction, I live in Seattle, Washington, in the US, in the upper left portion of the screen. I work in Los Angeles, California, but I work remotely. And I'm very pleased now to be working for this month in Paris. This is just wonderful to be here. As I said, I'm a computer scientist, and my research interests they're basically two. They have to do with location and also personal data privacy. And in terms of location, what I work on is looking at GPS data, huge amounts of GPS data, looking at road traffic and doing things like location prediction from that. In terms of personal data privacy, what I look at is privacy leaks while browsing the web, what you're revealing to, say, Google, even though you don't know it, and also looking at privacy leaks from inferences. And these two fields combine into some other work I've done on looking at privacy techniques for location in particular, looking at the monetary value of GPS data. What if instead of giving away our location data for free, we got money for every GPS point that we gave away, and also making personal inferences from location data. So what I'm going to talk about, there are three parts to this, three brief parts. I'm going to talk, the first two parts are about two different computational experiments that we've done. And then the third part is what I'm planning to think about here in Paris. So this first one is called Web Browsing Leaks Sensitive Information. And this is with Kyle, who was a summer intern with us, and one of my former colleagues, Sid Suri. And what we're thinking about here is, as you browse the web, we all know that the way the web makes money off of us is largely through advertising. So as you browse, you build up an advertising profile, and anybody can go out and get their advertising profile, which kind of describes your interests. And those interests are described like in this table here. There are a list of keywords and then just a true or false, whether or not that is something that you are interested in. Are you interested in exercise, Italy, Toyotas, exotic birds, true or false? These keywords are very innocuous and not really very invasive, not really very embarrassing. So you would think that if you're browsing the web and looking at things having to do with drug addiction recovery, for instance, you might not want people to know that. And you can be confident that that is not explicitly represented in your advertising profile. The experiment that we wanted to do, though, was could we look at these interests that are built up based on your web browsing, including browsing possibly to sensitive sites? Could we put those through some machine learning and figure out what you're really looking at on the web? And it turns out that you can. You can compute with some probability that this person was looking at sites having to do with drug addiction recovery just based on this information bottleneck here, which supposedly would otherwise protect your privacy. And so in detail, what we did is we looked at 47 different sensitive groups of people. And here are the sensitive sensitive characteristics. So some were interested in drug recovery, domestic violence, pregnancy, suicide, all these things that you might not want people to know that you're browsing about. And so what we did is we set up simulated people browsing that would look at regular, normal, everyday websites, but also a certain fraction of the websites they looked at had to do with these topics over here. And the research question was, could we look at the resulting advertising profile from all these people and figure out what sensitive kind of topic they were interested in just based on that supposedly innocuous advertising profile. So we did some machine learning, and it turns out that we could, with 77% accuracy, put you into one of these categories based on just that advertising profile, which is actually supposed to protect your privacy, but it really doesn't. And so the implications of this are that you could get your sensitive characteristics can be exposed through your advertising profile, and also you could get advertising that exploits these sensitive characteristics. So, for instance, if you're interested in drug addiction and recovery, maybe you could get ads for opioids or something like that. Or if you're an elderly person, maybe you're especially vulnerable to someone trying to trick you into doing something that you shouldn't be doing on the web. Okay, moving to the next experiment. This was a behavioral experiment asking, can we induce concern for personal privacy, for personal data privacy? So can we make people more sensitive to what they're revealing on the web? And so the experiment here that we did, this was a survey from 928 different people. And we started off by asking this question: how much do you value the privacy of your age, gender, and zip code? And zip code is just the American version of a postal code. And so each of these people gave us 3 numbers for age, gender, and zip code, how much they valued the privacy, how much they wanted to keep those 3 pieces of data private about them. And then we asked them in the second step to enter your age, gender, and zip code. And then we displayed some inferences that you could make from their age, gender, and zip code based on what they told us. So for instance, we can infer their income. And then we asked them the same question as we did at the beginning. Now that you've seen these inferences, how much do you value the privacy of your age, gender, and zip code? And we wanted to see if there was any difference, if after seeing the inferences, people would raise or lower their amount of privacy concern. So here is an example of an inference that we made about someone. This was someone who was, I think, between 50 and 59 years old. They were male, and their postal code put them in the northern part of Alabama, which is kind of a conservative part of the US. And so when people entered these 3 pieces of data, we showed them a customized set of inferences that looked like this text. And I won't read all of this. I'm going to start in the second paragraph here. Your annual income from wages and salary is likely around $45,000 per year. Your income is affected by your highest level of schooling, which we estimate is high school. We think the property you live on is worth about $180,000, and you most likely have 2 vehicles available in your household to drive. You very probably voted for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Then we made some health inferences. Your chance of being obese is this. Your chance of being physically active is 32.4%. Your chance of being a smoker is 22%. And your chance of being an excessive drinker is 14.7%. So that's what we can infer from this person's age range, their gender, and their zip code. And so we would show a custom inference like this to everyone who participated. And so it turns out that we were able to shift people's valuations of age, gender, and zip code. These histograms show how much their privacy concerns shifted after they saw the inferences. These big spikes here are at 0. So most people didn't change how much they were concerned about privacy, but these are all skewed to the right, which means that in general, people became more concerned about their privacy after having seen those inferences. The differences were small, but they were statistically significant. And a question that we always get is, how accurate were these inferences? And so we actually asked that as part of this survey. A lot of people said that most of the conclusions were correct, and other people said almost all were correct. So in general, the inferences were pretty accurate. So this is a way you can actually possibly change someone's behavior by showing them what can be inferred about them. So that leads to what I hope to work on here in Paris. So what can you do about the fact that these companies can make inferences about you. So let's say you're on the web and you're filling out a form that's asking for your gender, age, and postal code. You can, before you submit this data, you can hover over the submit button and you get a pop-up that says, before you submit this data, the recipient can infer this about you, your income range, your political party, or education level. And before you submit, maybe you want to click here for recommendations. So what could those recommendations be? And that's one of the things that I want to look at here. First I have to acknowledge that the way that we actually make these inferences is from data that anybody can get. This is just US Census data that gives age, gender, postal code. And then from these things, we can then infer income and education level. And so I have to give credit to Jenna, who's an undergraduate that works with me, and she is the one who got all this data ready for me to use now. So part of my work here is going to be writing code, and part of it's going to be writing text. And this will be the coding part. And so research question number one is, what if you are vague in answering these questions? So when you're filling out this form, instead of filling in your actual age, maybe you just give an age range. And the question is, looking at this census data in terms of probability and statistics, how much does being vague help your privacy? How much less do you reveal about yourself as you're becoming more and more vague in your answers to these questions? Research question number two, instead of just being vague, what if you're outright lying about your answer? So instead of, if you're really a male, excuse me, what if you answer female? How is that going to change what can be inferred about you? And that's something that we can answer just numerically using the actual data. So that's just all a bunch of programming. Then we get into this more subtle question about how can you measure the privacy loss of inferences? So here's what these inferences look like. So this is annual income across the x-axis. Here is probability along the y-axis. And so the kind of inferences that you make from this census data just end up being probability distribution. So this blue shows one distribution of your possible income. The orange shows another distribution of your possible income. And this is just based on age, gender, and zip code, or whatever information you're giving to the web. And so how much privacy are you losing if we're computing an inference like that about your income? How much privacy are you losing if we compute something like this about your income? Can we quantify what is the privacy loss of these two different distributions? And is one, does one represent more privacy loss than the other one? And this is, as far as I know, an unanswered question. And it's kind of interesting to think about how we might figure out some numerical way of expressing privacy loss. And this is my last slide. This is a research question number 4 that I'm interested in. And this has to do with lying on a form, giving a completely false answer. And so the question is, how much are you willing to lie to protect your privacy? People in general don't like to lie, but they might lie if they protect their privacy by a certain amount. So for instance, if you lower your age by X years, this reduces your privacy loss by Y. So let's say we can compute something like this plot over here. What this is over here is the amount that you're lying about your age. So if the amount is 0, then I'm giving my exact age to whichever form I'm filling out. If the amount is -5, then I'm lowering my age by 5. If the amount is +5, I'm increasing it by 5. On the vertical axis is the amount of privacy loss that you're experiencing by giving an answer. So if you give an answer that's accurate, no change in your age, maybe you lose 10 points of privacy. I don't know what the units of privacy loss are. That's research question number 3, but let's assume we've answered that. If you add 5 years to your age, maybe your privacy loss is a little bit less. If you subtract 5 years from your age, maybe your privacy loss is even less than that. And so can we compute this curve that you need to operate on that gives you the amount of privacy loss versus how much you're lying on your form? And so now that you know that you have to operate on this curve, you have this tension, right? You say, okay, I don't really like to lie. No one likes to give false answers, but here's the benefit I get from giving a false answer. And so how do I account for that tension between doing something I don't want to do which is lying, but getting something in return that I want, which is more privacy protection. Okay, so that is the end of my talk, and thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. Any questions from the audience? Yes, Patricia?
Yes, hello. I was wondering, thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. I was wondering whether there are some cultural sensibilities to this. Could it be that the way it is measured and the way you've conceived of this might change from one country to another or from one social, cultural context to another? And the reason why I'm asking this is because I'm Swedish. And so in Sweden, we have a very high level of transparency. You don't need to go through the browsers in order to find out where I live, whom I'm married to, how much money I make, if I own a car, which car I own, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is, public data. Anybody can get it. So that's why I'm asking, would the context matter for you?
Hey, thanks for that great question, Patricia. I totally agree with you that this is context dependent. And we heard that the previous two talks were talking about being social and being in your environment and how that can change you. I think not only is it context dependent, it's probably dependent on the individual. Some people are more willing to share than other people. Maybe if you have less to be embarrassed about, you're more willing to share, right? In some cultures, maybe other people knowing about your income doesn't matter. And maybe the reason for that is there are other, like in your culture, it sounds like that information, that type of information may be easy to get in other ways. So there's no reason to go to any other means to try to protect it. So I think you're absolutely right that it is context dependent and even dependent on individuals as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us today. Yes, and I encourage you to keep talking during this month for both the fellows that are here and the others. Again, feel free to contact us and we will put you in touch with the speakers.